Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Good to have you here as always. So this week, I'm looking into skinhead movements and infighting. Yeah, more skinhead content. I know, but hey, you guys seem to love it. You even all voted for it. And someone asked me a question, which I actually want to answer today. It's a bit of a complex one, but why do these groups fight each other? Why do different factions like Hammerskins and Vinlanders hate each other and fight each other? What's going on there? I thought they're supposed to be fighting a common cause, a common enemy. Well, not so much, but I'm going to talk about it today, so let's get into it. Grab yourself a coffee. Got mine. Amazing. And hey, if you want to buy me a coffee or support me, many different ways you can do it. All the links are in the description below. But let's get into it. Let's talk about skinhead infighting. You know, my initial introduction to skinheads in New Zealand wasn't the best. You know, they were pretty violent and they seemed to have no cause. They didn't have a direction. Sure, they were all uniting under this banner of white power, but they didn't really project that. What they were doing on the streets was just violence, and they were just targeting minorities, normally weaker minorities, you know, so that didn't really make sense to me. It was just a violent rabble. That's all I saw it as. And I didn't really see any of their ideology at that time because they weren't about it. I mean, sure, some of them were fervent Nazis or whatever, but they really didn't follow those ideals, not to what I saw anyway. So many years later, when I moved to Australia and got involved with the Australian scene, I was like, okay, cool. These guys are a little bit more onto it. There's not as much violence, and it's not senseless violence. These guys seem to be a lot more organized, and I thought, okay, great. You know, there's definitely possibilities for activism here. And I was kind of interested in the activism side of things when I first became involved with the group. So I got involved with Blood and Honor, and I was about promoting ideology through music. I thought, okay, that's what these guys are about. And then we would spend countless days hanging out with each other and talking about the ideology and, you know, how they promote and what they do. And then I realized, well, they don't really do a lot. You know, they're not out there fighting these enemies as they claim they do. And all the time that I spent with that skinhead scene in Australia, the only violence I actually saw was directed at each other or other skinhead groups. And so the further I got into it, the more I started to realize that these guys really didn't practice what they preached. You know, especially when it came to being, you know, the warriors of the white race and going out there and, you know, stomping on the vermin and all this kind of bullshit that they whipped themselves up with. You know, and trust me, it was like a monthly get together at my place. We'd all sit around having a barbecue and they would talk about all this stuff they were going to do and, you know, how they would, you know, bash this guy if he ever came across him. And, you know, if he ever saw this on the street, he would go and do something. And it didn't take me long to realize that these guys were just all talk. It was all just sitting around. They weren't actually going out and doing what they said they would do, you know. And I know back in the early days with the skinheads, they did. You know, there, especially in the UK, there were massive protests and riots and fights in the streets. And they were kind of the glory days of the racist skinhead movements back then. And these guys idolized them. They wanted to be like that. But none of them really did. I mean, okay, there was a couple of exceptions, including this guy.
This guy is crazy. Who's that crazy guy? Oh, crazy, mate? I'm just seething with racial hatred.
Who was actually my club brother who patched me in. He ended up leaving the club about 6 months into my prospect period because he just didn't want to be a part of it anymore. So what fighting did I see? What violence did I see? What action did I see them taking? Well, all I ever saw was bickering and infighting and sometimes violent conflicts between members, not just members of the club. You know, we always had our beefs, but we'd sort it out because we're part of that club. But then the entire scene was constant back and forth of, you know, bickering about this guy or this guy did that. And most of it was ridiculous. It was petty. One of the guys was stripped of his prospect patch because he introduced a drummer to this band that they were forming, and this drummer had a mixed girlfriend. So they, of course, kicked him out of the band, and then of course the prospect who brought that guy into the band was stripped of his prospect patch. Oh, wow, okay. And they were so paranoid about everyone who was coming into their groups. You know, they were so paranoid to the point that they would just dig deep into these people, and they would find out any little bit of information to omit them from the scene. And usually it would come with some form of violence. You know, they'd be given a slap and turfed out of the scene, or they'd be stomped on or whatever. And then there were the events, the gigs, you know, our yearly get-togethers. That was where I saw a lot of the violence, and it was directed towards other skinheads. All these guys would get together and they would just whip themselves up into a frenzy. And of course you had all the I want to be, you know, Mr. Badass Skinhead, and they would pick on the younger, skinnier guys, you know, or whatever. I saw quite a few of these guys get knocked out at gigs. I did it. I actually, you know, I beat the shit out of a dude at one of our gigs because he was from another crew and he was there trying to prove himself. You know, and I decided to see if he could prove himself, and it didn't go his way. It definitely didn't. But that's when I realized how we're all just fighting each other. We're never fighting our enemy, using physical violence against our own people. This doesn't make sense to me. This really doesn't make sense. So I started thinking about it and looking into it as to why. Why do these guys end up hating on each other? Why do these guys end up fighting each other? Why do these guys end up torturing each other, as happened in Christchurch in the mid-2000s? One of the members of the Fourth Reich was severely tortured and he had his fingers cut off. Apparently that was over a drug deal. So what drives all these groups to fight each other, you know, and including groups, you know? We're at war with so many different skinhead groups. It was crazy. I didn't know who was a friend and who was an enemy half the time. You know, in fact, in my time in Australia, when I was patched with the Hammerskins, we went to war with Volksfront, you know, which was another large patch skinhead organization. This war started because my crazy brother knocked out the leader of Volksfront in Australia. You know, sent him flying backwards through a door. I was there the night that had happened. More infighting. So all this kind of stuff was going on all the time. And as I was always so busy taking phone calls about this guy or that guy, and this guy did this, and this guy said that, or this girl said that, and blah, blah, blah. And we're going to bash this guy, and we're going to fuck him off and everything. I'm like, this is just crazy. You know, where was the phone calls going? Hey, brother, we need your help. We've got, you know, 20 Lebanese guys here, and, you know, they want to punch on, and, you know, that's kind of what I expected. Or, hey, let's go support a march, you know, an anti-immigration march or whatever. You know, there are all these causes they try to make you believe that they were supporting. So it did take me a long time to kind of look at it and figure out what was causing all this infighting. It was hate. Hate is an emotion. It's not a cause. It's not something to follow. So when you're fueled strictly by hate, and if you have hate for other people or other groups, you know, you're directing it at such a massive target. You know, you're basically targeting 2/3 of the world's population. Like, man, that's a lot. Yeah, and when you have that much hate and there's, you know, and you're like, right, this is it. I am for this cause because this is what is going to help me with this hatred that I have, mostly for myself. And that's where a lot of this stems from. It's self-hatred, fear. You know, a lot of these guys come from trauma. A lot of these guys come from being misunderstood when they're teenagers, you know, they're bullied or whatever leads them down that path. So when they get into these groups and they don't find the release they're looking for, because these guys need to get that out. They need to get this aggression out. And getting their aggression out, or if they're not standing behind a cause where there's, you know, this passion and energy.
More passion, more energy.
There's no direction to it. And that's a big part of the problem with the whole structure of these groups, like Blood and Honor, leaderless resistance. Hammerskins do not have leaders. You know, there's no hierarchy. They do that to avoid like hierarchical conflicts. You know, no one guys going, oh, I want to be the big man, I want to be the boss, or whatever. The problem with that is there's no direction. Again, there's no way forward. And there's no way forward when it comes to hating. They're not releasing that anger, that energy, that emotion that's brought them to that in the first place. And that's the root of the problem. That's why they become part of it. But then when they become part of these groups, especially nowadays, and there's no release for that anger, there's no release for that emotion, even online, sitting there, you know, yelling and screaming at people, you know, using caps and swearing and blah, blah, blah. That's not a release. It just adds to that anger and that hatred. It just makes your blood boil. You know, my old mate, the crazy guy, he had to ban himself from going online because he would get so worked up and so angry, and he would sit yelling and screaming, and he's realizing that he's yelling at a screen and it's just pointless. So he actually, when he left, he started doing Tai Chi and smoking weed just to calm himself down. He found a way to release that energy that he'd been feeling all those years. And that's what we need. I found mine through meditation. While these groups have all this anger and they can't direct it at certain people like they want, you know, they need to direct it at other people, and they'll generally direct it towards each other racist groups. That's why there'll always be infighting in these groups. That's why these groups are always going to be fighting each other. The egos, the anger, the hatred, it's got to go somewhere, right? Hate doesn't build a movement. It only creates chaos, division, and destruction. All right, so that's it for another fine evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Much appreciate you being here as always. And if you want to support the channel, many different ways of supporting this channel, and one of them is through membership. Yeah, you can actually become a member and help support this channel a little bit more. All the details are down below, just as everything is, including the little buttons that says like, subscribe, and there's a little bell. If you hit that, you'll get notified of new videos coming out every week. I'll see you on Sunday night. I've got another awesome video coming out. So I'll see you then. Have a great day, and love and light to you. Peace out, y'all.